Time for this week's 10-Minute War, our homage to the great 10-year war between Woody and Bo, as we get the view from the other side of the scarlet and gray septic tank with our good friend and the voice of college football, who himself has a phenomenal YouTube channel, Mark Rogers. Good to see you, brother. How are you?
I'm doing well, Steve. Good to see you as well.
Always good to talk to the few, the proud, the reasonable and not insane Ohio State fan. Of course, I would be one of the many self-loathing Michigan fans at the moment, but we've earned that self-loathing after the last 15 years. We're doing our season preview this week. I want to get, though, first and foremost, your big picture view. Where, your fellow Ohio Stater Kirk Herbstreit was on game day this weekend, waxing poetic. Jim Harbaugh's building a program. You wouldn't want anybody else coaching here. And I don't know how to take that. On a personal level, I love me some Jim Harbaugh, but as a fan, I've kind of lost hope at the same time. So I'm kind of all torn up inside, frankly, Mark. And so I don't know if Herbie's kind of doing the whole po' boy act. Yeah, I mean, you guys keep losing to us by 50 every Saturday, every year. We're kind of happy with how things are going, or if he's really sincere that he sees signs of hope. Because what I see, Mark, is a program that is stuck in college football's friend zone, right? Like, we're really close to the hot chick, the hot guy. And this time when they call us at midnight on a Saturday, it's not going to be a sounding board. It's going to be because they want something more, and it's never because they want something more. It's always to be the sounding board. You don't get out of the friend zone, man. Can this program get out of the friend zone, Mark?
Well, I just know that Michigan's playing really good football against everybody else for the most part, except Ohio State. So if you take away the Ohio State domination, I don't see a big difference between the Michigan program under Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan program under Lloyd Carr. But once you're able to hang that national championship trophy, then people seem to forget everything else for a long period of time. And that seems to be the calling card that everybody looks to, and for good reason. That's why everybody's out there playing, or should be, is to win a national championship. But to compare Jim Harbaugh's tenure versus Lloyd Carr's, I don't see much of a difference. And I find myself, as an Ohio State fan, defending Harbaugh almost on a daily basis.
I bet you do.
I think the program is in a good place.
Listen, dude, we're buddies, okay? But I got to call BS. Saying, hey, I don't see much difference other than the most important game of the year is like Mary Todd Lincoln thinking, all those other trips we made to the Ford Theater worked out great. If it weren't for this one last trip we made to the Ford Theater, I mean, life was great. Every other time we went there, we had a great time at the Ford Theater. It's kind of an important game, Mark, isn't it?
That's how I grew up. It was the game and still is, even though it hasn't turned into much of a game in the last 15 years. I convince my son, or try to, each and every November that, man, this is what it's all about. And I'm still nervous about this thing. But Jim Harbaugh has had to deal with the Urban Meyer / Ryan Day Ohio State program. These other Michigan coaches, starting even with Bo, certainly he had to deal with it during the early stages of his career versus Woody. But then it was Earl Bruce and John Cooper on through, and did not have to deal with this stage, this elite status of Ohio State football, where they're winning 90+% of their games. So bad timing on Jim Harbaugh's part, but he's taking on a monster, and he's delivering what Michigan coaches have delivered in the past.
The other thing that's changed too, there aren't any more shared championships. Okay, I mean, from 1969 to 1969 to 2004, Michigan had 12 shared Big Ten championships, and in amongst those 12, 2004 lost to Ohio State. Okay, there were 1998 lost to Ohio State. There were several of those years where 1970, 71 lost to Ohio State. There were lots of those years where Michigan lost to Ohio State but still shared a Big Ten championship. You just can't share Big Ten championships anymore. And with the exception of the extreme outlier that 2018 almost was, where if Maryland converts that 2-point conversion at the end of the game, Michigan wins the division without having to beat Ohio State, and then probably goes and wins the Big Ten championship, right? Okay, but Maryland didn't convert that 2-point conversion. So barring an extreme outlier that didn't even happen, like 2018, you're pretty much going to have to beat the other team to get, each team is, to beat the other to get to where you ultimately want to go, and you just don't get to share championships anymore. And I think that and with the playoff, it just feels like for fan bases at the level of a Michigan and Ohio State that it's almost championship or bust every year. The only acceptable consolation prize, Mark, appears to be if you get to a New Year's Six bowl. And then anything other than that kind of feels like college football's NIT these days. Am I wrong?
Well, I'm going to jump on your side of the argument for this one point. It has to do with money. So when Les Miles was fired at LSU and Mark Richt at Georgia, I was asked, as you were, I'm sure at the time, should they have been fired? Look at their winning record. Look at the championships that they contend for in the SEC. And of course, Les Miles had a national championship at LSU, and Mark Richt came oh so close. But are they being paid? How are they being paid? So am I judging them to be good college football coaches doing a nice job at those universities? Absolutely. But they're being paid top 3 to 5 money in the nation, as Jim Harbaugh is. Therefore, the expectation is not run a nice program and win 9 games per season. It's let's win championships, compete for championships on a regular basis, and break through and win them. So the time's ticking for Jim Harbaugh because he's being paid at an elite level to win championships.
So before you came on, I laid out my top 10 crystal ball predictions for the 2020 Michigan football season. There's 3 that you want to zero in on. So let's look at those 3 one by one. One of the ones you want to zero in on, my prediction that Joe Milton will surpass the 56.1% completion percentage that Shea Patterson had last season, which would be one of the worst of any quarterback for a ranked team. I mean, that is very, very subpar by today's college football. All right. So why did that stat catch your eye?
That stat caught my eye for a number of reasons because weeks prior, I went back and looked at Joe Milton as a prospect and just was curious about his high school stats. And I was confounded to see a 47% completion percentage in high school. So I believe your question is he going to surpass Shea Patterson's 56% completion percentage? I don't know, but I believe that he better, because Michigan finishing with a 9-3 regular season record in 2019 with a quarterback completing 56% of his passes is a bit of an aberration here. You know, we're in the era of pitch and catch football.
Yeah.
Where these teams are so
well, you can do that when you've got 10 guys on your team that are on NFL rosters right now. That shows you how talented that team was last year, that they overcame that. I mean, that is average at the most important position in the sport in this day and age, and they still got to 9 wins because of the talent that they had around Shea Patterson last season. And Joe Milton didn't have that kind of talent around him in high school. So I think he's going to get past 56%. The issue, though, is he's got to be at least a 60% passer given today's game, and that's the stat. That's the part I don't know about.
Well, to your point here, Steve, I looked it over, and Shea Patterson had a completion percentage that ranked 101st in the nation out of 114 qualifiers.
Wow.
So there were 13 worse, 100 better. And this current season, this current college football season, we have 73 qualifiers for the passer rating. 63 are better than 56.2%,
wow.
10 worse. The top 20 in completion percentage this year have a record. Their team's record is 37-13. The bottom, or if you take everyone under Shea Patterson's completion percentage from 2019 this year, their record is 15-21. So yes, Michigan overcame Shea Patterson's inability to complete passes at a standard rate in college football, which the new bar, I think, is around 65%. Mm-hmm. It's amazing what these guys are completing now across the country.
All right, the next point that you wanted to zero in on, that a prediction I made earlier, is that Michigan's running game will actually be better than last season. Now, that may seem crazy to people that note, all the offensive linemen Michigan just put into the NFL, but even with those guys, I think we were like 71st in the nation in run blocking efficiency. So when you look at the stable of backs Michigan has, I think it's the deepest stable of backs that Michigan has had. It's been quite a while. I mean, we're talking like when guys like Ed Davis was their 4th string tailback in the early 90s, the kind of depth they have this year and the way they've recruited there. I don't see how they could be any worse than 71st in run blocking efficiency. I think they can only get better. Now, it might not be top 10. It might be 61st, 51st, but I think it's going to be better than in the 70 percentile. But what are your thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, if Bo hasn't rolled over in his grave for about 18 other reasons, he's going to roll over in his grave over these stats. 77th in the nation in rushing. I'm not going to the advanced metrics, but the standard metrics at 151 rushing yards per game. 89th in yards per carry. They couldn't run it against the teams that they lost to, namely Wisconsin, 2.1 yards per carry. Michigan State, even in a big win, 2.4 yards per carry against Sparty. So they were at 3.5 or less against just about everyone. Surprisingly, they beat up Notre Dame in that big win against the Irish, and even against Alabama, they ran the ball pretty well, but ran it against mostly the bad teams and couldn't run it against the quality teams on the schedule. So I play up to the offensive line a lot. We like to talk the freakish athletes on the outside and the quarterbacks and the running backs, but I try to give maybe lean the playing field toward the offensive line on Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, a little bit much because I feel bad for those guys. And I think the offensive line unit is the most important on the field. And this is what causes me hesitancy in saying the ground game is going to be better, but I do believe it's going to be better. The offensive line, you've got shuffling up front. Jalen Mayfield, your best guy, I believe, is still decided to opt out.
Nope, he's back in. He's back in.
Oh, okay, so he's back in. So this helps my argument, because my final point was going to be exactly what you were starting to allude to, Steve, is that the running back depth and development was an issue coming into 2019, where Zach Charbonnet was relied on for 33 carries and had to be a workhorse early in the season against Army. And then I remember watching...
That basically screwed up his knee. He came into his college with a knee injury in high school, and that workload early in the year basically had him playing at about 70% the rest of the season because of what you're talking about right there. Yeah.
So minus Chris Evans going into 2019, and with Charbonnet having to carry such a load as a freshman, and with Hassan Haskins, for most of us, being a complete off-the-radar player as a recruited running back, switched to linebacker. Now he comes back as a running back. I remember watching the Illinois game thinking, who is this guy? Love this guy. I quickly became a fan of Hassan Haskins at 5 yards a carry, 5.1. Charbonnet scored 11 touchdowns. So you bring those two guys back after they've developed through all those reps. You get Chris Evans possibly back in the mix, and you got True Wilson as well, coming off a nice 5 yards per carry season.
Freshman Blake Corum is that was a big time recruit. You're going to see a lot of him this year too.
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
So I do like the development of the guys that are already there and the depth, even though the offensive line seems to be in a bit of a shuffle, having lost all that talent to the NFL. So I say better running game in 2020 than in 19.
See, I think the run game efficiency and the completion percentage numbers, I think they're symbiotic. I think because not until the very end of the year was Shea Patterson a consistent threat to throw the ball downfield on early downs, that teams got to gang up on the running game. And then when teams ganged up on the running game, like you saw in the Iowa game early in the year, we could not complete throws down the field. And so that just becomes a vicious cycle, right? And so I think those two stats most of last year were kind of symbiotic and led to each other's worst outcomes. All right, the final prediction that I made for 2020 that you want to talk about this fall is what?
The Michigan State series. So obviously this is the game for Michigan State. Pardon the pun about the game, not necessarily being it for Michigan versus Michigan State. I placed a ton of trust in Mark Antonio. And for the first half of his tenure, he certainly pulled through and dominated this series. But then the decline of the program, Michigan's taken back over as by far the superior program in that state. Now Mel Tucker takes over a very difficult situation at Michigan State in comparison to the division in which they play. So being a first-year head coach is always a difficult task, but even multiplied by this COVID situation with no spring practice, difficulty in communicating with your team, building relationships, terminology, all the things. And of course, they're going to have a few games to play before they take on Michigan. But we're talking about a top 15 to 20 team versus a top 45 to 50 team. So I think the streak continues. Michigan's much better. They win 31-13.
Finally, Mark, I am predicting Michigan starts the year 1-2. Loses the opener at Minnesota. Fans or not, Michigan doesn't win games at night on the road against ranked teams. That's been well established. So I think they lose that opener. Plus, I think there's a matchup problem for Michigan with those receivers for Minnesota against a really young and completely untested group of corners. So I think they lose that opener at Minnesota, come back, destroy Michigan State, and then I think they lose at Indiana. I think Indiana gets Michigan for the first time since 1987. Last year, notwithstanding, Michigan's played with fire against the Hoosiers. We didn't have to play Michael Penix last year. Presumably we will this year. And then I think Michigan goes on a bit of a run before they take their annual beating to Ohio State and finishes 5-3. Provided Rutgers doesn't cause us to lose a game because they can't handle COVID. What are your thoughts in terms of a prediction for Michigan?
I've yet to make my official Big Ten predictions. Need to go through the schedule and the whole deal. But certainly, I did see your poll on Twitter, and I answered 5-3. That was my gut reaction to, okay, I generally know what the schedule is. I'm not going to try to predict bounce backs and how particular games could affect other games, but just a straight shot on what I know the schedule to be, and the opponents 5-3 with, of course, that wild card weekend coming up, championship weekend in the Big Ten. It'll be interesting to see who matches up against whom in that. Then that 5-3 record for me then squarely puts your boy Jimbo on the hot seat for 2021, safe for this year, and then 2021, that one in which people will really say, okay, you need to deliver now.
Always good to talk to you, my friend. Thanks for joining us. Take care.
Always appreciate it, Steve.